Welcome back to the second episode of the KSM challenge, where I am going to be trying to get a brand new level 70 druid to reach Keystone Master. To do this, I will have to get my character set up, geared, and work my way up with only pugs. In the last episode, we went over our talents, completed our first Feroc Assault, and did some of the Zerlak Caverns questline for some easy catch-up gear. If you haven't seen the first episode of this series, be sure to check it out in the top right hand corner of your screen right now. This left us off at where we are now, at around item level 383. Just like last episode, I would like to set some goals for this episode. I want to complete and kill every boss in LFR, and complete as many Mythic Plus dungeons as possible to try to fill up some of those vault slots. And as the series goes on, our goals will definitely get a lot shorter or maybe more precise, since we will try to focus on mainly Mythic Plus for the most part. To start off this episode, since it is a new week, that means we are going to accept the Loamm Niffen reputation quest to get a Splintered Spark of Shadow Flame. A little tip is that the campaign questline gives you a few rep items, but if you aren't in any rush to get your renown up, you can use these items and save them to instantly complete the quest. Early on, Sparks of Shadow Flame aren't too useful until we can make some enchanted crests, but it is definitely nice to get as many as possible that the catch-up system will allow. When I opened up the reward from the quest, we actually got really lucky. We got a ring with haste and crit and also a socket. This was basically the best thing we could have gotten since our rings are still very terrible. So I'm glad we had some good RNG. Next, we're going to hop right into some LFR since I want to try to get tier as soon as possible. We are starting off with the first wing of LFR, the Discarded Works. It is finally time for our first instant endgame content of this challenge. We are faced with Kazara, who is a mostly patchwork fight on LFR. You want to dodge the swirlies, drop the puddles outside of the raid, but not too far, as there will be players that will be targeted with lasers who will have to bring them over the pools to stop the laser from following them. I'm mainly going to treat LFR as somewhere where I can learn my rotation and the flow of how Balanced Druid works. My damage is going to be very, very bad in most of these fights since my gear and overall just comfortability are still so low on my Druid. One trait that I will have that will definitely help a lot is my experience. So I'm going to try my best to not really focus on damage and just try to do lots of mechanics while leading other players and nudging them in the right direction. I think that this is also going to be a good example for new players who maybe aren't yet doing impressive damage numbers, but anybody can watch a YouTube guide on how to prepare for a fight so that they have the knowledge to deal with the mechanics themselves, but also help out other players who maybe are too afraid to ask and just need somebody to lead them. It definitely takes time to gain the confidence to explain mechanics and lead a raid to a degree, but you just have to realize that at the end of the day, it's just LFR. If you mess up and people get mad at you or kick you, who cares? You queue up again and you learn from the mistakes you made. As for loot that dropped from this boss, there was some very high rolls that meant it was nearly impossible for me to beat any of them. With that little rant out of the way, we are now on our way to the Amalgamation Chamber, which is also, again, a pretty simple fight. In higher difficulties, you usually want to keep these bosses separate since they have a dot corresponding to each boss that will hit players within a certain range, and then at around 50% health, they will combine into one boss and their abilities will combine. But for LFR, you can usually just stack them to increase your cleave damage, because the dots aren't too bad. For the most part, you just have to dodge incoming abilities and run out of certain mechanics. This boss did actually drop the Vessel of Searing Shadows, which from what I know is the best single target trinket for pretty much all casters in the game. although sadly it isn't very good in AoE, so it's not that good for Mythic Plus. And I didn't win the role anyways. Now we make our way to the Forgotten Experiments, which can drop one item that we will definitely be looking out for during this series. For the most part, the most impactful things we can get from raid is usually tier and trinkets. This trinket in particular is the Ominous Chromatic Essence. It allows you to pick a secondary stat to give as a static buff. Sadly, this trinket did not drop, but there was a piece of tier that did drop, but we also didn't win the roll on it. This is where the first wing of LFR ends, and we open the door to the second wing, the Fury of the Giants. During the first wing, I didn't really have to explain mechanics to anyone in the raid since we had no wipes. As we made our way to Assault of Zakali, which for a coordinated group is considered one of the easiest fights in the raids, I knew that this might be where I need to ask for raid leader or something like that to try to figure out some Groots. If you don't know, during this fight, if you don't split up the raid evenly, then ads will run to the door and start to do basically unhealable raid damage. Just as I expected, our first pearl was a wipe. This is totally fine though, since it is expected with LFR. My damage on this fight is actually quite good, since Boomkin's single target is alright, but where they really shine is in AoE. All I did was I asked in chat if I could get assist. They actually gave me raid leader, which is even better. And I started by going to the groups and separating them out evenly just to make sure that we have a tank on each side and our damage is somewhat even. This fight was actually a lot longer than I was expecting and definitely different from how I'm used to doing it. There was one pretty big problem though, is that I think the tank on my side didn't really have the best situational awareness. I'm not sure if he was new or he just wasn't really sure, but the ads will spawn, and like I said, you don't want any of them to get to the door. So I would tag them with my dot abilities to aggro them onto me, and then usually a tank will pick them up basically right away. And it's usually their signal to kind of get aggro on them since they were just attacking me, and we want to keep them grouped up so we can do as much damage as possible. Since this wasn't really the case and the tank wouldn't aggro them, many times I had to just sit in bear form to give me a better chance of surviving and basically run around waiting for the tank to aggro them. I was pretty relieved when this whole fight was over. There was no loot to really talk about since nothing was actually usable by the Boomy, but our damage was very good, nearly double what it was in most of our single target fights. I'm just wondering, maybe hopefully next week we won't have the same issue with the tank and the aggro and everything, so our damage might even be better next time. Next up is Rashok, who for pugs can usually be the first kind of wall, because if you stack the lava effects that he drops on a player, you'll do lots of pulsing AoE damage. Luckily, this only lasts for a short period of time in LFR, but on other difficulties, it never stops, so it's basically a guaranteed wipe as it just does too much damage. Our first pull wasn't too bad, but you could tell we lacked structure. Some players knew that stacking the lava effects was bad, so they would run very far away from the raid and just kind of pick a random spot. We also had lots of deaths early on, including my own, and the first of our LFR journey, because we didn't have enough players in the soak mechanic. If you are trying your best to lead a raid group in LFR, or even normal and above without a guild, it's definitely very useful to have polls like this where you can kind of gain new insight. So what I did was I set up some markers for players so that they had some sort of direction of where to drop the next lava pool. We did have a player who stacked them, but luckily our healers was able to keep us alive. Mistakes like this are totally okay, but only if you actually realize that they're a mistake. This is why I think it is a good thing to let players know what they did wrong, but in a constructive manner. You don't want to be personal with it. Since raid it's just a team effort, you really do need every player to improve, especially once you reach the point where you're playing with a guild for an entire raid tier. As for loot, a ring that would have been a massive item level upgrade dropped but nearly everybody needed it, so we didn't really stand much of a chance there. We almost got our first piece of tier, but lost the roll to a hunter by 4. Even worse, right here I had a bit of a technical problem. I knew before starting this series that I would need lots of storage space since each episode is hours and hours of footage. I installed a second SSD, which would be plenty for what I would need, and it went well, and it's been working for the past 2 weeks. The only problem was that I forgot to change the location of where my files would go when the recording would stop. So right after Rashock, my old hard drive ran out of storage, and that caused the recording to stop. I didn't notice this until we had killed Zaskarn already. For helping players with mechanics, I mainly just wanted the tanks to try to be close to the wall and move in a counterclockwise motion, just so that we can kind of try to avoid any spawning in the middle. It still can happen due to RNG, but other than that, we just want to kill the golems, the ads that will spawn as soon as possible. And once they will die, I can use them to get rid of any traps that do end up spawning in the middle. I did live for the entirety of this fight, but my damage was incredibly low, as you can see, because I was really focused on using the dead golem mechanics to clear up some space for our group. I do have proof, as you can see, that we did kill the boss, as I finally managed to win a roll on 2 items. That was a 408 one-handed dagger with crit mastery, which isn't too bad, and a tier piece token that allowed me to create the chest roots of the Autumn Blaze, our tier chest piece. This is a really good drop since it's actually the most commonly used tier piece for balance druids out of every tier piece. You might ask, well, how in the world could you possibly know that? If you go to a website like Subcreation, u.gg, for example, any websites like that, you can check what the majority of players are using on your spec in either Mythic Plus or Raid. In both instances for Balance Druid, the chest piece is a very high priority tier piece item because it has haste and mastery, which are the 2 best stats for Balance Druids. Once again, we have reached the end of another LFR Raid Wing. So far, we have had some wipes and deaths, but overall a very smooth experience. In between queues, I was doing the Sniff N Sneak activity with Merit because I couldn't remember what the rewards were when I did them on my Warlock. To my surprise, we got a 402 pair of Haste Mastery Bracers, which, as a lot of you guys know by this point, are our best in slot stats. This, along with the new main hand and chest piece, brought us up to item level 395. We are on to the final 3 bosses. Next up is Magmarax. Magmarax requires little to no raid leading, to be honest. The only thing that I tried to tell everybody was to stack the circle effects. This will spread unless a player is standing inside the effect, which it will then start to shrink, but it will deal damage to them. If multiple people are standing in it at the same time though, the lava will go away even faster. The damage from it is pretty minimal so long as everyone stacks in them. So other than that, it's a very simple fight. There is a soak effect, but you just need one person to soak each of them and that's about it. I'm sorry for the list that's in the top left corner of the screen. It's taking up a ton of space. It's from one of my weak auras, which is hidden on my Warlock, but it is character specific. There was another piece of tier that did drop from this boss as well, but I only had to beat a 65 and we couldn't get it done. Echo of Neltharion's main mechanic that can really mess your group up is the walls. Luckily on LFR they are a lot more forgiving. As you can see, they just take a significantly longer time to take shape, so it allows you to more easily get in the correct position. Other than that, you just gotta be sure that when the corruption ads spawn that you're focusing them down and trying to kill them as fast as possible. I definitely noticed watching a lot of this footage back that I'm just terrible at the moment at using my eclipses properly. As a Destro Warlock, you can spam Incinerate as a filler, but Balance Druid definitely requires a lot more attention. Luckily, during Incarnation, you gain the benefits of both eclipses at the same time, so it's not really a problem. But Incarnation also has a random chance to proc during an encounter, which can definitely give you a break from focusing on what your eclipses you need to be in, and you can kind of just spam Wrath if it's a single target fight. When you are in the last phase of Echo of Neltharion, you want to enter the purple portals on the ground when right before he's going to finish the cast of Ebon Destruction, or else it will one-shot you. The best outcome is technically to have one person per portal, since for every portal that isn't occupied, an ad will spawn. These ads aren't the biggest deal in the world, but it could theoretically cause you to wipe. With the Echo of Neltharion following, that leaves us with only one more boss to go. Finally, we are at the final boss, Sarkareth. Surprisingly, this boss actually went really well. During alt runs with my guild, I was very undergeared. Luckily, this meant that I could focus on doing mechanics, which on Sarkareth is mainly the bombs. This meant that I had a lot of experience with dealing with it, so that was mainly what I tried to do during this fight. The bombs need to be picked up by a player. During the early phases of the fight, you can simply stand in these purple pools like you see me doing here. This will only take about a second or so before it takes you into this down place. In this area, you do take reduced damage, so you want to wait for your bomb to explode before collecting these 3 circles, which will take you back to the regular fight. During this time, you can grab 10 of these small orbs for a stacking haste and speed increase. You don't want to be down here for too long though, as you do have a time limit before it will kill you. In the later phases, to go down to the down area, you'll need to stand in these small blue swirlies that fall from the sky. Each time you get hit by one, it will give you 5 stacks of Oblivion, and you need 10 stacks to go down, so it'll usually take 2 hits. I definitely noticed that in this fight, where I would usually always use defensives on my Warlock, it wasn't very necessary, other than for the one-shot mechanics. As we get into harder content, obviously this will matter a lot more, how I'm using my defensives and trying to prevent damage, but on LFR it just wasn't really too big of a deal. There is also tank explosions. As you can see, about halfway through the fight, one of our tanks doesn't go down into the down place. This ended up killing 12 out of our 25 players, including me. The rest of our players did manage to finish off the boss, thankfully. The loot that dropped was a 411 crit mastery belt and a beacon to the beyond. The beacon is a melee trinket, but with how the upgrade system works, it would allow us to get a discount for future trinkets. Sadly, we didn't win either of the items, so that will be the end of LFR for this week. I managed to get 2 pieces of gear, definitely less than I was hoping for, but that chest piece is a really good upgrade, just because the stats are perfect. We do still desperately need a second ring. Overall, our damage is pretty bad in raid, to be honest. This will definitely improve over time, but our single target just isn't up to par with our AoE, which is where we really shine on a fight like Assault of Zakali, as an example. With our LFR goal done, it was time to head into some Mythic Plus finally. I did try to find some other players for Heroic Dungeons to complete the Fighting is its own reward quest, but it was taking a little too long, and I think most players have just kind of graduated from needing the 415 item level reward at this point in the patch. So back in Valdraken, I went up to Lindormi and selected the I seem to have misplaced my keystone. She will then give you a random keystone, and in this case it was a level 2 Brackenhide Hollow. Not my favorite dungeon, but the timer is usually forgiving, and it is also a fortified week, which is a lot better for this dungeon than tyrannical. For those of you who aren't aware, fortified is an affix where non-boss enemies have 20% more health and inflict up to 30% increased damage. So let's list our group and see what kind of players sign up. First off, we had a few undergeared players until a item level 439 Devastation Evoker signed up. This was a great sign. If whenever possible, I would like to form a group, especially early on, with players of the same armor type as mine. This means that if they get any loot at the end of the dungeon that they don't need, they can trade it to me and vice versa. In this case though, with how overgeared this evoker is, it's better to just take them. Next, we took a 389 Rogue, a 396 Mistweaver Monk, and a 366 Vengeance Demon Hunter. In hindsight, this was way too low of an item level for the tank, but we have this super overgeared evoker. There's no way we don't 3-chest this, right? Right? The first few pulls go great. I'm doing good overall damage and no deaths yet. A few packs in though, we then spend about a minute and 15 seconds just waiting. Why, you may ask? Good question, because I'm not actually sure either. Our tank was just randomly going AFK. No big deal though, it must just have been something quick. Shouldn't happen again, right? Because we are on a timer, so going AFK is probably not the best choice, but oh, we just wasted another minute from something I've genuinely never seen before. Oh wait, also that's kind of weird. The rogue is losing in overall damage to the tank by nearly double. And also the healer. I'm sure that won't last. It's probably just early on in the dungeon. Anyways, our tank decided to go left after the first boss, which I rarely ever see groups do, since the mobs over there can be a lot harder and it can really handicap you later on into the dungeon since you'll be lacking from the total mob kill percent. We had a pretty big pull here since my lack of experience with this route leads to me jumping into a few mobs that I just didn't notice on the left side. Luckily, we were able to stabilize pretty easily. Now arriving at Gutshot, we used Heroism here and managed to kill him with 15 seconds still remaining. Treemouth also falls with no problems whatsoever. The final boss of this dungeon, who can be really nasty on Tyrannical Week, falls, but we have a slight problem. We are missing over 5.5% on our mob total. This leads to us having to run around to look for more mobs to kill since we actually cleared out the final room before killing the last boss. A little tip as well for tanks: if you are ever pulling mobs at the end of a Mythic Plus Keystone and all the bosses are already dead, you can usually do a large pull, and larger than usual, just as long as you guys don't die. This is because once you reach 100% and finish the key, all the mobs will drop aggro and reset. My utility usage in this dungeon was alright at best. I did get lots of interrupts, but I'm struggling to adjust to how long Solar Beam's cooldown is compared to most other interrupts that I'm used to. Overall, I think the biggest problems in this dungeon for why we didn't 3-chest was our rogue's damage, the AFKing from the tank. It just kind of messed up our tempo. It would go from complete stop to going super fast to stop. It was definitely pretty interesting. Sadly, we didn't get any gear from this dungeon, but we did get 66 score and a level 4 Vortex Pinnacle. With that dungeon for the most part being a success, I thought that we should try to see how difficult it would be for me to get into a group by applying myself, since I can always make a group with my own key, but let's see if other people would actually take me. I applied to a Underrot 5 and got in almost instantly. The leader was our Blood Death Knight tank. Only a few minutes passed and the rest of the group had filled up. As we start the key, I tried to be a little bit careful since I know this first bowl can be pretty deadly. Our healer gets taken out pretty quickly from the Chosen Blood matron. I get rooted and panic, so instead of shapeshifting to simply break the root, I stand there like a helpless infant as I get hit by the worm frontal, but I do manage to live. Luckily, when my health goes below 40%, my frenzied regen procs. First boss goes well, and as we're approaching the second boss, I get targeted with Decaying Mind, which requires healing to break it. Just as I thought my suffering was over, I get stunned again for another 15 seconds. The rest of the trash, including the second boss, are both really clean. They're done pretty easily. I was a lot better in this dungeon with using my Typhoon to supplement Solar Beam when it was on cooldown, since we aren't in a key that is high enough to have Sanguine yet, so it means that I don't have to save it for a situation like that. lots of the casters here, especially in this area after the second boss, are very deadly. So kicking them is basically all you have to do to stay alive. The third boss was another cakewalk pretty easily. And the fourth boss was a little bit sketchy since the group-wide damage can definitely build up and require some defensives. Our healer died here, but since it was only the second death for the dungeon, we had plenty of battle reses. And with 3 minutes to spare, we managed to 3-chest it for a gain of 90 score and a pair of 408 haste crit gloves, the first item that we've gotten from Mythic Plus. Overall, this dungeon went pretty well. My damage is still a little bit lackluster, but that's just a gearing thing in my opinion, so honestly that dungeon was a lot better than the last. Our tank was pretty good, healer was pretty good. And since that dungeon went even better than the Brackenhide, I thought why not try to sign up again for another, as I didn't really have much luck with finding anyone for my Vortex Pinnacle. It was pretty late in the week, so most people weren't likely to want to do it. We managed to get into a level 5 Freehold, and Freehold is actually one of my favorite dungeons this season. I feel like I'm also starting to see some small improvement in my Eclipse usages since LFR. It still isn't perfect by any means, but I'm slowly getting more and more comfortable with my rotation. The first boss of Freehold falls, and we make our way across the first bridge. You definitely need to be careful here, as the Enforcer, especially on fortified weeks, can really catch players off guard since the space is so limited, and it does a lot of damage. If you guys don't know, you can actually use a Warlock Gateway to skip this mob, since it can be pretty nasty, but I wasn't fast enough to type it out to the lock in my group. Next pull is quite simple, but many tanks make the mistake of not isolating these mobs enough, which, to be honest, is probably one of, if not the biggest thing in Freehold. You want to fight them, you want to try to fight mobs in their own little area, because if for this pack example you don't move them, it is incredibly easy to have some other mobs path into you and immediately cause a wipe. The water spout ability that you will see here and later on isn't very forgiving, so you do need to make sure to run out of it as soon as possible as a caster. We did accidentally pull the Trapper Patrol here, but our tank did a very good job in getting things under control, and it wasn't really too big of a deal. I'm definitely going to have to learn when it comes to the second boss in Freehold which Eclipse is better to enter. If you guys know, or maybe you're a Balanced Druid player, let me know what you guys personally do on this fight, because I'm not totally sure, because sometimes they're close enough for 2-target cleave, so maybe I should Starfire, but then a lot of times they split up, so maybe Wrath is the better choice, so I'm not totally sure. Other than that, I did my best to dodge and stand in the haste crit effects that the boss drops. Sadly, our streak of no deaths was put to an end as our tank moved these 2 packs into a safe area, but our DPS wasn't fast enough. This led to one of the patrol ads getting aggroed, which caused people to run away into another pack. I tried my best to save this pull with Typhoon and Incarnation, but I failed to use Solar Beam, which led to us taking a ton of group-wide damage. After our tank died, I knew it was a wipe. This was a setback, but a 2-chest was still very possible. The rest of our pulls went as planned, but we seemed to have some troubles with the shark boss, since some of our casters would run away from the sharks, but not towards the blood pools, which you can use to stun them. We didn't have any deaths, but it sure was stressful since there wasn't really much I could do to help. The last 2 pulls of this dungeon require a lot of interrupts, since pretty much any of those spells can lead to a wipe, especially Thundering Squall. In the second pack, this caused another 2 deaths, as I had already used my Solar Beam and Typhoon to interrupt other abilities. We cleaned up the last boss to get a 2-chest and 88 Raider.io score. Unfortunately, the item that dropped for us was another pair of gloves. I will have to sim both of these gloves to see which one's better, but my guess would probably be the pair from Underrot. So that does lead us to the end for today's video. I did get 2 Shadow Flame Essence from LFR, which I will be posting on the auction house right now before I log out, which should give us a sizable chunk of gold. Our item level is 395, but hopefully the vault can give us some amazing gear. And be sure to drop a like and subscribe to give yourself guaranteed vault luck. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.